A modern form of slavery. Has a name, debt. Debt does not come to you with chains made of iron. It comes with contracts and signatures and small monthly installments that appear harmless at first. It does not threaten you with whips or cages. It offers you comfort, convenience, and an illusion of control. Debt has become the most silent form of captivity that exists today, and millions carry it with them without realizing they have accepted shackles disguised as opportunities. The modern world has created a culture where debt is not only normal, it is expected. The idea is planted early. You are told you need a credit card to build history. You are told you need loans to study, to drive, to live. You are told this is the way life works and you accept it. Because everyone around you has accepted the same, why question the rules when every neighbor, every colleague, every family member is already living inside them? But what if the system was never designed for you to be free? What if the goal was not to give you wings, but to give you just enough rope so you would never notice the knots tightening around your ankles? Debt is seductive. It tells you buy today, pay tomorrow. It whispers you deserve it now. It promises you that waiting is unnecessary and that the future can always carry the weight of your decisions. But have you ever asked yourself, how much of your present is already owned by your past? How many tomorrows have been sold before you even reached them? How much of your energy is already promised to banks and creditors before you wake up each morning? A person in debt is not simply someone who owes money. A person in debt is someone who has traded freedom for a moment of relief. They have exchanged long-term peace for short-term comfort. And often they do not even realize it until the chains rattle loud enough to wake them. Have you noticed how debt follows you to bed? Have you felt how it lingers in the silence of the night when you cannot stop thinking about payments due? Have you seen how it bends your shoulders forward, making you walk with an invisible weight that others cannot see? The cruel part is that debt disguises itself as progress. The student loan says it is education. The car loan says it is mobility. The mortgage says it is security. The credit card says it is lifestyle. But if you strip away the marketing, if you look at what each of these truly does, they all pull from your future and place a lock on your present. If debt were a person, it would smile at you, offer you something beautiful, and then quietly take your calendar, your paycheck, your sleep. There is a reason history is filled with stories of rulers and empires keeping people indebted. In ancient times, peasants gave portions of their harvest as payment to the landowners. They lived always working, never owning, never free. Today, the crops have been replaced with salaries and the landowners with banks, but the rhythm is the same. You work, you pay, you work, you pay. Do you see the cycle? Can you feel the resemblance between the old and the new? Can you admit that you might not be as free as you believed? The strange thing is that some debts are not called debts at all. They are celebrated. A new car with financing is seen as success. A new house with a 30-year mortgage is called achievement. Yet why should ownership take 3 decades? Why should something you call yours still belong to a bank? Why is the world proud of chains, polished to look like trophies? Debt does more than take your money, it takes your choices. When half your paycheck is already spoken for by monthly obligations, you no longer decide where your effort goes. You no longer work for dreams, you work for survival, for staying afloat, for not falling behind. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to feel trapped? Not because of lack of talent, but because of commitments already signed in ink. Have you ever felt that your future was not wide open but already written in numbers and contracts? People speak about freedom as if it were a distant mountain to climb, but freedom is much closer and much simpler. Freedom is being able to say no. Freedom is having the power to walk away. Freedom is sleeping without counting debts in the dark. How many people around you can truly say they sleep without thinking about bills? How many smile in public but lie awake in private with numbers chasing them? Debt is patient. It does not scream. It waits for you in silence. It grows in interest, in fees, in extensions. You promise yourself you will pay it off next month, then the next month becomes the next year, and suddenly a decade has passed. Did you ever imagine that time itself could be stolen? Not by war, not by sickness, but by a signature on a paper. Did you realize that the true cost of debt is not the money, but the years of your life? You cannot live freely while it lingers. And here lies the question, what would your life look like without debt? What would you do differently if no part of your income was already promised away? Would you take risks? Would you travel? Would you change careers? Would you dare to dream bigger, or has debt made you smaller, teaching you to settle, teaching you to obey, teaching you to fear every step outside the safe routine? They call this modern life, but in reality, it is a modern cage. And the cruelest part is that most do not fight to escape. They decorate their cages, they polish the bars. They compare whose chains look shinier. When will you be the one to stop decorating and start unlocking? When will you notice that every monthly bill is not only money lost, but time stolen? When will you refuse to let debt decide who you are allowed to become? Debt creates not only financial prisons, but emotional ones as well. You begin to measure your worth, not by who you are, but by what you owe. You start to believe freedom is something reserved for others, those who earn more, those who got lucky, those who somehow escaped the trap. Yet the truth is, freedom begins not in numbers, but in mindset. Have you ever wondered why some people with modest salaries manage to live without chains, while others with large incomes are drowning in obligations? Could it be that the system is not about how much you make, but how much you allow to be taken? The cycle of debt feeds on silence. Rarely do people talk openly about it. Everyone hides behind smiles and filtered pictures, while the weight of interest grows in the shadows. A society that normalizes silence around debt is a society that ensures the cycle continues. Why? Because if you never see the chains, you never try to break them. If you never hear others admitting their struggle, you continue to believe you are alone. Have you asked yourself how many of your friends are secretly enslaved by the same invisible master? Have you thought about how many stories of joy are actually stories of survival covered with bright colors? Debt is not only a thief of money and time, but of imagination. The more you owe, the less you dream. Every dream becomes measured by affordability. Every plan becomes filtered through what is owed. When was the last time you dreamed without calculating? When was the last time you pictured a life not bound by minimum payments? What happens to a society that loses its ability to imagine beyond its chains? Does it not become obedient, predictable, easy to control? The corporations and banks that thrive on debt know this well. They sell not products but lifestyles. They create desires that did not exist before, then offer credit to fulfill them. They play both sides of the game, fueling the hunger and offering the solution. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to borrow and how difficult it is to repay? Why is the door into debt wide and golden, while the door out is narrow and hidden? Could it be intentional? Could it be that your dependence is their design? Some will argue that debt is necessary, that without it we cannot grow, that borrowing is the foundation of progress. But is progress defined by ownership or by servitude? Is progress buying what you cannot afford now and paying for it 3 times over in interest? Is progress really living in houses you do not own, driving cars you do not own, wearing clothes paid with money you do not have? Or is progress finding a way to live without selling your future before it arrives? The hidden cruelty of debt is that it often begins with hope. People borrow to build something better, a future degree, a family home, a small business. But along the way, hope is quietly replaced by obligation. The dream that once fueled the loan becomes the reason you cannot sleep. The tool that promised opportunity becomes the weapon that steals your freedom. When did we accept this trade? Why did we allow the system to convince us that bondage is the price of possibility? Look at the language used around debt, consolidation, restructuring, refinancing. These are not words of liberation, they are words of prolonging. They do not break the chains, they polish them, they make them more tolerable, more manageable. But why should captivity be managed at all? Why not destroyed? Why should the human spirit settle for tolerable slavery instead of true freedom? You might believe that escaping debt is impossible, that you are too deep, too late, too trapped. But is that not the exact belief that debt wants you to hold? Is it not the greatest lie that the prison is permanent? What if the bars are thinner than you imagine? What if freedom does not begin with paying everything at once, but with refusing to take on another chain? What if the first step is not money but courage? Imagine yourself free from it for a moment. Picture waking up with no weight pressing on your chest, no calendar filled with due dates, no fear of the mailbox or the phone call. What would that morning feel like? What would your first action be? Would you breathe deeper? Would you smile differently? Would you finally hear your own thoughts, instead of the constant echo of numbers chasing you? And most importantly, what would you choose to do with the energy that debt no longer steals? Because that is the secret. Debt is not only about money, it is about energy. Every moment you spend worrying about it is energy drained. Every extra hour you work to pay it off is energy consumed. Every choice limited by it is energy trapped. And when your energy is trapped, your life is trapped. If you could reclaim that energy, what could you build? What could you protect? What could you expand? What could you make meaningful? Some cultures in history had clear rituals for freedom of debt. Ancient laws that forgave debts after 7 years, a recognition that no person should be enslaved forever. But in our modern world, forgiveness is rare. Instead, debt is designed to outlive even the debtor, passing on to families, locking generations in chains. Do you see how powerful this trap is? Do you see that it was never about one person? It was about keeping entire societies under control, and yet within you lies the possibility of breaking free. It does not begin with sudden wealth. It begins with awareness, with choosing to see the cage, with choosing to question the rules, with daring to say enough. The courage to live differently may look foolish to a world obsessed with polished chains, but is it not better to walk barefoot in freedom than to walk in golden shackles? So the question returns, what will you do? Will you continue to decorate the cage? Will you convince yourself that everyone lives like this, so it must be normal? Will you surrender years of your life for comforts that fade? Or will you choose to see debt for what it is, a modern form of slavery that thrives only as long as you agree to wear its mask? Debt disguises itself as opportunity, but once you accept its invitation, you discover it is a collar. It promises access, comfort, progress, but what it truly delivers is dependency. When did we start mistaking dependency for freedom? When did the act of purchasing become more valuable than the act of owning? Do you ever ask yourself whether you are buying things or whether things are buying you? Because every swipe of the card, every click of confirm, is not just a transaction. It is a contract, a silent oath that ties you to tomorrow with invisible strings. This slavery is clever because it does not use whips or chains. It uses credit scores and late fees. It uses advertisements showing smiling families and luxurious lifestyles that hide the truth of the bill that follows. Have you noticed that the chains of debt are often wrapped in velvet, that you are made to believe that suffering in silence is a mark of responsibility, that if you complain about the burden, you are told to be grateful you had the chance to borrow at all? What kind of world thanks the jailer for the key to the cell? Perhaps the greatest trick of this system is convincing people that debt is personal failure. If you struggle, it is because you were irresponsible. If you drown, it is because you did not work hard enough. But step back and look closer. Is it really individual weakness, or is it a structure designed to ensure that struggle is the norm and not the exception? Could it be that the system profits more when you fail than when you succeed? Who benefits when millions live paycheck to paycheck? Who gains when families live in homes they technically do not own? Who grows richer when your exhaustion is normalized? Think about the language of the workplace. Hustle, grind, sacrifice, always more, always faster, always harder. And yet, even with more hours and more effort, the chains rarely loosen. Why? Because the goalposts move, interest grows, inflation rises, new fees appear. Do you see how the race was never meant to be won? It was meant to keep you running. Have you considered that debt is less about repayment and more about endless motion? A treadmill that looks like progress but leads nowhere. The emotional cost is rarely measured, but it is devastating. Anxiety becomes your daily companion. Sleepless nights become your inheritance. Arguments in relationships often begin with finances and end with silence. How many marriages collapse under the weight of unpaid bills? How many children grow up watching their parents' shoulders sag with the stress of debt? How many dreams are quietly buried, not because they lacked vision, but because they lacked credit? Have you asked yourself how much of your life you have already sacrificed, not to live, but just to keep paying? And here lies the cruel paradox. The same system that enslaves you sells you stories of freedom. The vacation paid on credit that promises relaxation, but delivers another year of repayment. The car that symbolizes success, but drags you into deeper obligation. The education loan that claims to open doors, but often locks them with chains of decades-long repayments. Why do we keep believing these stories? Why do we allow our future to be sold piece by piece with smiling commercials and polished contracts? Could it be that we fear living without the illusions more than we fear the chains themselves? There are those who will argue that debt is inevitable, that to participate in society you must borrow, that without credit you are invisible, but must belonging cost your soul, must acceptance come with slavery? What kind of society demands chains as entry tickets? What kind of civilization praises enslavement as participation? Have you asked yourself what freedom really means in such a world? Is it the ability to purchase without cash, or the ability to live without fear? If you trace the path of your labor, where does it lead? Hours of work translate to wages, wages translate to bills, bills translate to debt repayments, and the cycle begins again. Who truly benefits from your labor when so little remains in your hands? Is it not a form of modern feudalism? You work, you sweat, you struggle. Yet the fruits of your effort are claimed by another master, not a king in a castle, but a corporation in a glass tower. Do you see the reflection of medieval serfdom in your bank statement, and yet the system survives because it thrives on hope? Every debtor believes in a future moment when it will all be different, a raise, a bonus, a lucky break, and so they endure. They endure for years, sometimes lifetimes, waiting for the day the chains will melt. But how often does that day truly come? How many die still owing? How many pass on the weight to children? How many spend their entire existence preparing for freedom, but never tasting it? Is this not the most heartbreaking deception of all? What then is the way out? The answer is not simple, and it is not instant. But perhaps it begins with refusal. Refusing to see debt as normal, refusing to accept that slavery dressed in financial terms is anything less than slavery itself. Could you dare to live differently? Could you resist the pull of every advertisement, every illusion, every false promise? Could you start to value peace over possession, clarity over consumption? Would you have the courage to look foolish for choosing freedom, while others decorate their cages with luxury? Freedom may begin with small steps, but each one is powerful. It may begin with saying no to another loan. It may begin with cutting away what feeds the trap. It may begin with conversations with others, breaking the silence that debt depends upon. Because once silence is broken, solidarity emerges. And once solidarity emerges, change becomes possible. Have you asked yourself what would happen if millions refused together? What would happen if entire societies stopped believing the lie that chains are normal? Would the system not tremble? Would the illusion not crack? But freedom is never offered freely. It is something you must demand, not from the system, but from yourself. Because the system will never give it willingly. Debt is its lifeblood. It cannot survive without your compliance. Have you noticed how quickly institutions rush to offer you credit? How banks call it pre-approved, as if they know your life better than you do? Do you ever ask why they are so generous? Have you asked yourself why strangers in suits are so eager to hand you money they do not own? Could it be that their generosity is only bait carefully wrapped to trap you for decades? The danger is not just financial, it is psychological. Debt shapes the way you see yourself. It makes you believe you are smaller than you are, that your worth is measured in numbers on a report, that your future is a shadow already owned by someone else. What happens to the soul of a person who no longer believes they can choose? What happens to the heart of someone who confuses servitude with responsibility? Can you see how the chains are not only on your wrists, but in your mind? Think about how debt changes time itself. When you owe money, your tomorrows are no longer yours. They belong to the lender. You may breathe today, but every breath tomorrow is already sold. Have you thought about how terrifying that is? That your hours, your days, your future years are not written in your own hand, but in a contract you signed under pressure or illusion. How much of your future have you already given away? And if the future is not yours, how much of the present can you truly enjoy? Debt whispers that it is temporary, but for many it becomes permanent. It says just this month, just this year, but months turn into decades. Have you noticed how quickly one debt is replaced with another? How the moment you pay one balance, another appears? How the weight never really lifts? Do you not feel as if you are always beginning, never arriving, always running, never resting? What kind of life is that? A life where finish lines are illusions painted on the horizon. A life where hope is sold like currency, but never delivered. And still, society tells you that you must play along. It says everyone does it. Everyone borrows, everyone owes. But is majority a measure of truth? If everyone is enslaved, does that make slavery freedom? If everyone is drowning, does that make the sea less dangerous? Have you asked yourself, when conformity became a virtue and questioning became rebellion, why are those who seek to live debt-free mocked as unrealistic? Why is simplicity ridiculed as failure? Why is silence about suffering rewarded, but honesty about struggle shamed? Look closer, and you will see the true masters of this system are not individuals but institutions. Entire industries thrive on your chains. Credit card companies thrive on late fees. Banks thrive on overdraft penalties. Universities thrive on lifelong student loans. Real estate thrives on mortgages that stretch across generations. Do you see how every chain you carry is someone else's treasure chest? Have you asked yourself why the richest industries in the world are built on the backs of the indebted? How different would the world look if the wealth of the few did not depend on the bondage of the many? And yet change is possible. History has shown that every form of slavery was once thought permanent, unbreakable, normal, until people chose differently, until voices rose, until silence cracked. Could the same not be true today? Could this era of financial slavery also collapse under the weight of its own deception? Could freedom be reclaimed not through revolution of arms, but revolution of awareness? What would happen if you saw your debt not as identity, but as an intruder? What would happen if you treated it not as normal, but as unacceptable? Perhaps the first act of rebellion is remembering that you are not alone. The system thrives on isolation, on making you believe that your struggle is unique, that you must bear it quietly. But what if you realized millions share the same pain? What if solidarity became stronger than shame? Could you imagine the power of millions refusing to suffer silently? Could you imagine the fear in the halls of banks if the indebted began to see themselves not as failures, but as a force? What would a movement of debt refusal look like? What new world could be built on the ashes of this one? Debt is a teacher, though cruel. It teaches the value of what cannot be bought. It reminds you that peace cannot be borrowed. It shows you that joy cannot be rented. It forces you to ask yourself what you truly need to live well. Do you really need the newest device, or do you need rest? Do you really need the bigger house, or do you need love? Do you really need the approval of strangers, or do you need freedom? Have you ever considered that what you were searching for in purchases was never in the purchase itself, but in the life you hoped it would give? Imagine for a moment a life beyond debt, a life where each paycheck is fully yours, a life where decisions are made not out of fear but out of choice, a life where your time belongs to you, not to creditors. How would that change the way you wake up in the morning? How would that alter the way you love, the way you work, the way you dream? Would you walk differently if no chain rattled at your feet? Would you breathe deeper if the air was not borrowed? Would you finally understand that freedom is not the ability to buy without cash, but the ability to live without chains? The path will not be easy, but it will be worth it. It may begin with small sacrifices but end in immense liberation. It may feel like loss at first, but will reveal itself as gain later. The cost of debt, freedom is discipline, but the reward is life itself. Do you have the courage to endure the discomfort of saying no? Do you have the patience to build slowly? Do you have the vision to believe that freedom is worth more than appearance? What is a luxury today compared to a lifetime of peace tomorrow? What is a sacrifice now compared to the gift of unchained generations? Debt is not only about numbers on a screen, it is about power and submission. It is about who owns tomorrow and who kneels to it. And perhaps the most disturbing part is that most people no longer see it as slavery. They call it normal. They call it necessary. They even call it responsible, as if shackles could ever be a badge of honor. But when did captivity become confused with maturity? When did handing over your freedom become an act of respectability? When did being trapped become the silent definition of success? To speak of debt is to speak of time, for time is the real currency stolen in the transaction. Every contract, every loan, every bill is an agreement to hand over your future hours, your future days, your future energy in exchange for something you often did not even truly need. And if time is life, then what is debt but life already sold? How many years are locked inside the signatures of people who only wanted to survive? How many dreams have been postponed to a later that never arrives? How many children grow up watching their parents, shoulders bend under invisible weights? How many marriages have been destroyed, not by lack of love, but by the constant suffocation of owing? How many lives are half-lived because their owners believe they must wait until the last payment to finally breathe? Debt seduces by appearing like a friend. It whispers that it will help you, now that it will give you what you deserve, that it will carry you until you are strong enough to walk alone. But does it ever let go? Has it ever stepped aside without asking for more? Does it not grow like a shadow that follows you, no matter how fast you run? Have you noticed how what was meant to be a bridge always ends up becoming a prison? How often have you told yourself that it was temporary, only to realize years later that temporary has become permanent? How many times have you heard others say, just until next year, just until I pay this off, just until the promotion? And yet their hair turns grey before freedom arrives. This modern slavery thrives because it does not look like chains. There are no iron cuffs, no whips, no masters standing above. Instead, there are credit cards, contracts, student loans, mortgages, payday loans, endless interest rates. The tools are paper and plastic, not iron and fire, and yet are they not just as effective at binding the human spirit? Is it not more dangerous to have a prison people defend rather than fight against? Do you not see how many wear their chains, proudly flashing their credit limits like medals? How many speak of their debts as if they were proof of adulthood instead of evidence of captivity? The cruelty of debt is that it disguises itself as opportunity. It tells you that you are advancing while you are really standing still. It makes you believe you are building a life when you are only decorating a cell. Why is it that we measure progress by possessions rather than by peace? Why do we measure success by how much is borrowed rather than how much is free? Have you ever asked yourself who defined these measures in the first place? Who decided that slavery should be called security? Who benefits from convincing the masses that bondage is safety? Look at the system with clear eyes, and you will see its machinery turning. Lenders thrive on late fees. Banks thrive on overdraft penalties. Corporations thrive on workers too afraid to leave jobs they hate because of debts waiting at home. Governments thrive on populations too preoccupied with survival to question authority. Can you see how the chains are not accidents, but architecture, not flaws, but features, not mistakes, but design? The house of power is built upon your willingness to borrow and your fear of stopping. Do you ever wonder what would happen if millions refused to play along? What would happen if the machine lost the fuel of your submission? But freedom is possible. It always has been. It begins in the mind long before it is reflected in the wallet. To break free, you must first refuse to see debt as identity. You are not your credit score. You are not your bills. You are not the interest owed. You are more than numbers, more than balances, more than contracts. Have you ever noticed how debt makes you shrink the way you think of yourself, as if you were only the sum of what you lack? But what if you began to see yourself as the sum of what you can build? What if, instead of identifying with deficiency, you identified with possibility? The journey out of debt is not glamorous. It is slow. It is patient. It demands choices that others will not understand. It requires saying no when the crowd shouts yes. It requires sacrifice that feels like loss, but is actually gain. Have you asked yourself whether you value freedom enough to endure discomfort? Do you have the courage to walk away from applause if it means walking toward peace? Can you endure being misunderstood today in order to be free tomorrow? Would you rather look rich and stay poor, or look simple and stay free? Every step toward freedom is an act of rebellion, because every dollar not owed is a dollar not feeding the machine. Every hour not promised is an hour reclaimed. Every life not mortgaged is a life restored. Imagine if more people saw debt not as normal but as unacceptable. Imagine if schools taught the danger of chains instead of the mechanics of how to wear them. Imagine if parents spoke to children about freedom instead of silently handing down their captivity. Imagine if entire generations began to see through the lie. What would happen to the world if freedom became contagious? Perhaps you are already asking yourself, what would life feel like without these invisible shackles? What would mornings feel like if your paycheck was fully yours? What would evenings feel like if no creditor could intrude on your peace? What would love feel like if it was not measured against balances due? What would dreams feel like if they were not postponed for a someday that never comes? Do you not long for that simplicity? Do you not ache for that kind of air? Do you not believe deep down that you were not born to serve a system, but to live a life? The first step may be small, but it is sacred. Perhaps it is refusing a purchase. Perhaps it is paying more than the minimum. Perhaps it is choosing to live smaller so that you may live freer. Perhaps it is breaking the silence and admitting aloud that you are tired of the chains. Each act may look invisible to the world, but to your soul it is thunder, for the soul recognizes freedom even in whispers. And what begins as a whisper can grow into a roar. What begins as a step can grow into a revolution. What begins with one life can inspire thousands. Debt is the story the system tells about you, but you have the right to tell another story. A story where your worth is not borrowed. A story where your joy is not conditional. A story where your time is your own. A story where you remember that chains are not natural, but constructed and therefore destructible. Have you ever thought about how every empire that thrived on slavery once believed it was eternal and yet collapsed? Have you considered that this empire of financial bondage may one day collapse too? Could your refusal be one of the cracks that brings it down? Could your life be one of the proofs that another way is possible? Imagine the generations after you looking back, not at the chains they inherited, but at the freedom you preserved. Imagine your children not watching your shoulders bend, but your spirit rise. Imagine your grandchildren not shackled by your debts, but lifted by your discipline. Imagine a lineage where captivity ends with you. What would that mean for their lives? What would it mean for your legacy? What would it mean for the story humanity tells about this age?